Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, dear viewers. Welcome back to another live stream of Ask Islam. We're here again, yet with another topic that relates to Islam and misconceptions about Islam or facts relating to Islam. In today's topic, we are discussing did Islam truly end slavery? This question is asked because if you look at the modern time, it is noted that somehow America or the Western civilization was the one that had ended slavery. But the actual starting of the ending of slavery actually started at the time of the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And the way he had done it was a much better way to do it rather than how it happened in most notably in this modern era in USA. And we see and how those effects are still occurring in these days as well, in USA and other parts of the world as well. To start off, I would like to introduce the panelists. We have Zahid Abid Sahib. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Then we have Musleh Shambu Sahib. Assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله
And
وبركاته.
we have Tahir Chaudhry Sahib. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So, to understand the landscape, can you describe the global state of slavery in the 7th century? I'll ask this to Tahir Bhai, if you can please tell us how, because we're going back to the Holy Prophet, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? And the era at that time revolved around slavery a lot. Please.
Ji, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. So, before diving into our subject or the topic of Islam and slavery, we have to kind of understand, first of all, what the playing field was at the time of Islam. So, before the coming of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know that the different empires having slaves was normalized. We have the Roman empires, we have the Persian empires, and then we have obviously the Arabian people who were directly affected with Islam. When we look at the historical times or of these specific empires, we see that having slaves was a normal thing. And when we look at the Roman Empire, we see that slaves were actually the backbone of their whole empire to begin with. It is said that up to 1/3 of their population of the Romans, they had slaves, or they consisted of slaves. And the slaves, they worked in their agriculture, their mining, their construction, their domestic labor, and in their army. So they were the backbone of their empire. Now, what we need to note is that they had no legal rights. They could be bought, sold, tortured, or even executed at will. And family separation was a routine. And slave marriages also had no legal standing. And then slave women were also used as concubines without legal prosecution or protections. So now we understand that this is how there was no need or no will or no desire to finish slavery during the times of the Romans. In fact, they kind of encouraged it, and it was part of their economy, and they needed to have it to sustain themselves. Then we look at the Persian empires. They themselves also, they had a lot of slaves. They served their nobles. They were slaves in their temples, and they had slaves in their military. And we find sources that say that the reason why or how they collected these slaves were either they were the captives, they were debtors, or they were sold by families to other people. So that's how people acquired slaves. And slaves often, even during this Persian time, worked in difficult situations and harsh conditions, which is the case even during the time of Islam, the time of the West, and even in most recent his past in the USA. Whenever there are slaves, there's always slaves who are working in hard conditions and they're not being cared for. Now, when we focus more towards Islam, we see in Arabia, not this is before the time of Islam, but in Arabia where Islam came. Arabia also, they had slaves, and there was no central government or legal code of how to deal with slaves. A person in Arabia could enslave someone through either debt, kidnapping, raiding, either by birth if someone was born to an enslaved mother, or being found as an orphan. If someone's child was unprotected and had no one taking care of him, they would take him into slaves. And even in Arabia, slaves could be beaten or killed, and there will be no legal consequences to this. And also, one thing to note, in Arabia at that time, before the coming of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, racial prejudice did exist, especially between the Africans and the Abyssinians. So every civilization, whether you look at the West or you look at the time of Islam or before Islam, they all had some sort of slavery. In fact, slavery was a source of their economy to sustain their economy. And in order to understand how Islam brought this revolution, first it is incumbent that we understand and study what the history is and what was considered to be normal at the time.
Jazakumullah khair.
If I may add, Mustajab Sahab,
Yes.
I think I'm hearing myself.
Tahir, yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, as Tahir Sahab said, there were multiple ways of enslaving people, but it's actually very important to remember that those enslaved people, even their children, once they have children, they're considered slaves. So their whole progeny is gone for the future.
So it's similar to what if you compare to the America in the beginning, how that happened as well. I think similar to that as well. Their whole progeny was assumed to be slaves as well. Jazakallah for the clarification. Actually, I'll just go to you, Muslibai, and ask that. It's a common question or a question that can be asked, that if Islam is the perfect religion, and there's a lot of prohibitions mentioned in the Quran, very directly, like do not drink alcohol or do not or other things like that. Why isn't it mentioned in the Holy Quran clear cut that do not have slaves, like the commands of pork and alcohol?
Yeah, so Mirza Bashir Ahmad radiallahu anhu, he is the son of the promised Messiah alayhi salam, the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. He actually wrote a book called The Seal of the Prophets, Sirat Khatamun Nabiyyin. In that book, he mentioned one whole chapter discussing this subject. I actually advise those viewers who are watching us right now to read maybe the whole book if they can, but specifically about this subject if they want to know. He explained the details of this. The reason why the Holy Quran does not say clear cut, there's like we are abolishing slavery, although Islam does abolish slavery, is because if he had done so in this manner, we have seen the effect of it in America. You know, in this book, Hadrat Mirza Bashir Ahmad radiallahu anhu, he explained, he actually compared the Holy Prophet ﷺ, how he abolished slavery and how Abraham Lincoln abolished it. He said Abraham Lincoln did what you were saying, clear cut, no more slavery. And what was the result? The result is today's society cannot take it. Until today, there is still racism in America. Whereas the Holy Prophet ﷺ, he took it gradually, slowly, very slowly. He had to make those slaves whose mental capacity was, or their understanding was that we are way below other people. And those who had slaves, they used to own slaves, it would be hard for them to take them directly that they are just like us normally. So he had to make it very slowly, and the Holy Quran does mention multiple ways and means to free them. So those ways and means to gradually free them are mentioned clear-cut in the Holy Quran. Islam does not allow slavery in any way except for during wars. During wars, it's not really called slaves, it's called hostages. You are allowed to take hostages. This practice was there before Islam, and Islam continuing with this does not mean that this is something wrong. This is something that happens in every war, that hostages or soldiers, whether male or female, if they are coming to your country, to your land to fight, and then they end up losing the fight, you keep them as hostages. The question is that if he had freed them that's the only way you keep hostages in Islam. There's no any other way. You're not allowed to go to the market and buy slaves. So if you're having hostages, now Islam tells you gradually how you should be freeing these hostages. It doesn't tell you should keep them and that's it. Islam does not leave you right there. First, it had to the Holy Prophet ﷺ had to teach the companions that they are just like you while they are with you. So he, for example, he would say to his companions, when you assign them a task, if they have anything that's very heavy for them, make sure you support them. Make sure you eat from what they eat. Make sure you drink from what they drink. Make sure you dress from what they dress. That whatever you dress them, you also dress. So he was gradually telling first the slaves that you are just the same, and telling the companions or the Muslims that you before Islam you probably used to own slaves, but now I want you to understand that these people are just like you before you free them all directly. And then slowly the Holy Quran or God the Almighty started revealing revelations to the Holy Prophet ﷺ to tell him how he should free them, not directly, not quickly. And I guess there's more detail to this. Maybe if we get time today, we can discuss it.
Jazakallah, that you have mentioned about the gradualism as well, how Islam actually promotes it by drying up the supply, basically, where you teach them in a way that it ends up that their slaves don't exist anymore. To continue on with this, I'll go to Zahid Bhai for this one, that in pre-Islamic Arabia, you could be enslaved for debt, kidnapping, or birth. How did Islam restrict the source of new slaves, as Muslim has mentioned, with prisoners of war? So how did Islam restrict that to the prisoner of war?
Jazakumullah. A'udhu billahi minash rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. This is a very good question, and Musta Sahib has explained some of the details already. But this question of how did Islam stop it, first and foremost, was that it limited the system of slavery. Even we cannot call it slavery because that is prisoner of war. So in Islam, there is no concept of making slaves. So the people who ended up prisoners of war, these were termed in the in our books, unfortunately, as slaves. So these were actually prisoners of war. So Islam restricts that prisoners of war can only be made if there is an actual war. So you cannot just grab a person. Three people saw a person in the desert and they're like, we can overtake him, and converted him to a slave. So grabbing somebody, a free person, or somebody is in debt, you cannot make him a slave. So only thing that was permissible is that during the times of war, you are allowed to take prisoners of war. Now, even that, they were considered prisoners. They were not considered slaves. We tend to compare the modern society with 1400 years ago to that time of Arabia, and say that how come then, why can't you just put them in prisons or things like that? Those institutions did not exist at that time. So what the Holy Prophet ﷺ and what Islam has taught us is that, for example, as Mustafa mentioned, the Holy Quran very clearly mentions that they are equals. They are to be respected, they are to be cared for, just as you would respect and care for other members of the society. And you must give them provisions, as Muslim highlighted, like clothes, like food, and all those things. You must provide for them. As I said, because there were no state prisons or regional prisons or any sort of prisons. So where do you keep these people who became prisoners at that time? So naturally, they were distributed among the populace, among the Muslim citizens, and they were then not only given chance to become free to different matters. For example, the Holy Prophet ﷺ asked among the prisoners, one time the prisoners came, and he asked them that, are any of you literate? Do you know how to read and write? And he said that if you teach 10 Muslims how to read and write, you are free. The option of makatabat, this was a contract between a person who was assigned a slave, that if the person or the slave wants to, for lack of a better word, we're using the word slave, if he wants to gain his freedom, he was given the option to work for his freedom, and the money he would earn from his work would go toward paying off whatever the price or the agreement was set. And once that amount was met, that person was considered to be free. So there were many options. For example, again, prisoners of war, the ransom is also there. So if the tribe comes, the person belonged to a tribe, the tribe comes and wants to pay the ransom for that man or the woman, then they were allowed to return. Or the trade. The Muslims became prisoners on the other side, and so naturally a swap could be done in that way as well. So there were different options for these people to become free. And now, as we see the case in the study, and you highlighted as well, that if you set free such a large number, because in some wars there were thousands of people who came as captives. So imagine you set free 1,000 of enemy soldiers within the populace of Medina, and thousands of them are now free. How do you make sure the safety of the Muslims in first place, and how would these people then survive living in the desert? You leave Medina, where do they go? It's not like there's some buses running between the two cities where they can hop on a public transport and just go back. They don't have horses, they don't have any means of traveling. They can't really go back until there is some sort of arrangement made. So all these things, or steps were there, so that these prisoners of wars, if they wanted to return, they could return safely.
So could we say then, for example, the terminology using slave, I think it's maybe because when you are a prisoner of a war, your rights are taken away, right? So you don't have rights. Even now, for example, you commit a crime or something and you go to jail, your rights are taken away from you and you are restricted. So in that sense, I guess we can call them slaves in there. And also the way you have mentioned it, the ultimate purpose was for when Islam came, the Holy Prophet ﷺ came, was to the betterment of the society, right? It wasn't to punish people or do anything like that. It was to make people Muslims and create a better society. And I just want to mention, maybe if you maybe have heard this or read this as well, that the comparison of the prisons in America and the comparison to some European countries, how they treat their criminals is much different. And the reason they do that is to get them involved in society so they can get better in jail, rather than how America or other countries do it, where they're just punished to do that. So, right?
Yeah. So the philosophy is the same. So when the Holy Prophet ﷺ came with the message from Allah, the philosophy was to establish people, to have people stand on their own feet. And when we look at the two systems, for example, USA and how they incarcerate people and how they do it in Europe, you see a lavish 5-star hotels kind of scene where people have, luxuries in their jail cells. But you see the outcome at the end of the day when they serve their time, there's a big difference.
It's
And
working.
this is exactly what Islam wanted to establish, is that we want to free our slaves. We do not want to keep slaves, but because slaves have been going on since before Islam, let's find a system where we can work and graduate these slaves and make them positive, productive members of society. And this is exactly what Islam did, and the Holy Quran teaches this every time. That every time you want to do a good deed, do it, and then maybe you can free a slave. That's considered one of the best deeds to do. But Islam doesn't say from today everyone is free, because that creates havoc. And you can compare that to even today. Like there's some pockets in USA, because they're so, they have a lot of media coverage. A lot of people can understand this concept. What they call illegal immigrants. If today you were to set all them free that are in captive, imagine the chaos that's going to be created in the society in USA. And those pockets they're gonna show a reaction. And in order to control that reaction, to control the security, to control the economy, to control the society, you have to have some barriers set in place. And this is exactly what Islam has done.
And as you mentioned, you can even now tell, as you mentioned about America, how the long-lasting effect of abolishing slavery there. Even now, if you look at the older generations that are still alive in America and have seen or were closer to the era of slavery, sometimes because society has banned using these terminologies and other things, but those terminologies still somehow come out of them when they're in their high emotions or something like that. So that still shows that it's still in them, ingrained in them, and it's not come out. But Islam, on the other hand, it gradually made it so that the opposite was ingrained. That we were supposed to love everybody else. I'll go to Muslim here, and I'm going to go to the specific verse in Surah Al-Balad where it talks about the fakku raqaba, where it's the freeing of the slave, and comparing it to righteousness. If you could explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so this chapter actually speaks about not only, so there are two different types of freeing the slaves. One is physically, the way the Holy Prophet ﷺ was doing it and encouraging the companions to do it. So Islam tells us freeing a slave, as respected Rabbi Zahid Sahib explained, how in Islam after the war, when you have the war prisoners, how you should free them. There's mukatba, there's fida, and there's mannan. In the Holy Quran, all three of them are mentioned. So the Holy Quran says, whenever you go into, this is also important to clarify, that Muslims are not allowed to take any war prisoners without winning the war. So you can't just randomly go to a country and just take the prisoners and run. That's not Islamic. Islam says, the verse of the Holy Quran says, فَإِذَا لَقِيتُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَضَرْبَ الرِّقَابِ حتى إذا أثخنتموهم فشدوا الوثاق فإما منا بعد وإما فداء حتى تضع الحرب أوزارها. That after you start the war, you have to make sure that I'm just going to the context translation of this verse. After you have won the war, you have like slaughtered or killed a lot of the enemies in the war, in the battle, then you are allowed to take the war prisoners. Now, how did the Holy Prophet ﷺ do the fakku raqaba that's mentioned in Surah Al-Balad? He encouraged the companions, because the Quran says فَإِمَّا مَنًّا بَعْدُ. So you can just, for the sake, for example, a person can say, I have seen this prisoner, he has a good heart. You can just free him. You don't have to do mukatbat, which means to have the prisoner to teach someone, to teach Muslims and just free himself. Or have him fida'an, which means that someone will pay ransom for him to get him free. So besides this, the Holy Prophet ﷺ just said, in general, if you want to even to pure yourself from sins, or you have more and more reward from God the Almighty, you have to free more and more prisoners. So he would actually encourage the Muslims to pay ransoms just to free the prisoners. The result of this was that it was teaching the prisoners the kindness and the generosity of Islam and the way they think about the prisoners, and it was also teaching the Muslims how they should receive them. Because one thing that would actually clarify the whole concept of this slavery issue is that we have to understand that this is a disease for the enslaved people, and for those people who are enslaving them. How is it a disease? You may call it a superiority and inferiority complex. For both these two things are a disease. When you enslave people, as respected Tahir Sahib was explaining in the beginning, how they used to enslave people, and as I said afterwards, that even their progeny becomes slaves, that they in their mind, that's it, we cannot be above that. So that becomes a whole nation issue, nation disease. For those who own slaves, they think we are higher than everyone else. And this issue still exists in countries, that if they started this and they think about themselves that they are higher than everyone else, even their progenies will have this superiority issue. You would see, so I don't want to name countries, but this is very obvious which countries, they think we are the best nation. Even when they compare themselves with Europe, they say Europe is nothing. We don't want to be like Europe. We are higher. So this is actually a disease. So when you're about the fakku raqaba part, fakku raqaba is speaking about freeing those individuals who are actually enslaved, and also freeing those nations. The way the Holy Prophet ﷺ did it, he actually set the ways and means for us, or the weapons for us, to actually abolish the individual slaves and also the concept of slavery in all the nations. Even up until today, I mean, you probably know that in India, caste system still exists. And this is also because of the same issue. Islam has the ways and means to actually abolish all these injustices.
Jazakallah. You mentioned the concept of kafara in there and gatwa, and I'm going to go to Zahid Bhai for this. That if you can explain what is kafara, meaning the expiation of sins. And you also, I think, mentioned this as well in your answer, where the legal contract known as mukataba. What does that mean, and how does that work as well?
Right. So the term kafara here means to do something. You have done something which is, in the Islamic terminology, considered to be wrong, and to rectify and to seek forgiveness, you are asked to do something which is good. So one of those goods is to free a slave. We find many examples. For example, the hadith says that a young child, uh, she came to the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and actually he saw a young girl crying in the street, and the Holy Prophet ﷺ asked that, what is the matter? And she said that my master had given me some money and I have lost it. And now I have lost it, and it's been some time, and if I go back, the master will be unhappy. So the master was a Muslim. So the Holy Prophet ﷺ, inquired that, uh, how much was it or what was it, and he assisted her, and then he took her back to the person who that girl was slave to. And seeing the Holy Prophet ﷺ, that person or the companion of the Holy Prophet ﷺ was pleased that the Holy Prophet ﷺ has come to visit him. He asked that, what brings you? And he said that your slave was scared that you would punish her for being late and having lost the money that you gave to the kid. And and the Holy Prophet admonished him that the child should not be so scared of you that something has happened and is scared to come back to you. And seeing this, he was so pleased that Holy Prophet visited him. He set the child free. And there are many examples of this nature, where when the Holy Prophet told them that this is not right, they set their slave to be free. One example is of Imam Hassan, that he was sitting, and the slave brought something and he spilled it on him, and he became angry. But the slave, who had been in his company for some time, he knew the Holy Quran. He says, the Holy Quran teaches, "Wal qazimin al ghaiza," that the person who controls his anger. So he said, I have controlled my anger. And then he says, the Holy Quran then says, "Wal afina an nas," and then the Holy Quran teaches that they do good to the people. He said, he gave him something, or he said, oh, I have forgiven you, I have no hatred for you, or my anger is gone as well. And then he says, the Holy Quran says, Wallahu yuhibbul muhsinin, that Allah loves those who do good. He says, okay, I set you free as well. So in this manner, many slaves gained their freedom. So this was a sort of expiation in a way. Then there's the mukatabat, is a contract. And simply put, it is a contract between the master and the slave, fixing the term or the amount of money that the slave would work and pay off, and in that way he would get his freedom. So I believe this was your question about.
If you can just add, I want to add a little bit more on this as well. That explain that, okay, if a person, as you mentioned very beautifully, explaining the psychology that was built in the Sahaba, the companions, where they were like known now, that it was ingrained in their hearts to free the slaves. But if there was a slave, as you mentioned, there was prevalent, what type of freedoms and rights did they have? Like how were they living together in a society like that, right?
So Muslim Sahib in the very beginning highlighted that the treatment of the slave was to be of kindness. They were not considered as lowly or anything along those lines. We find the guidance of the Holy Prophet ﷺ on this, to feed them what you eat, to clothe them in the same manner that you clothe yourself, and so on and so forth. So they were considered to be, to a large degree, in this manner, to be a part of the household, not as a slave. In another hadith, the Holy Prophet said, do not burden them so much that they cannot perform those tasks. And if you give them a difficult task, you should assist them in their work as well. So these guidelines, they show that Islam wanted that every member of the society can live equally.
So would it be correct to say, so from what I'm understanding from this, is that slaves, what the Holy Prophet did was that he made it change, that it seemed like it was a work contract, that somebody has hired them as a worker or something like that, rather than being a slave, how it is known in American and Western societies of being slave. Would that be correct?
Yes, yes, you would be correct in saying that he wanted to uplift these people, as Mustafa Saab has highlighted. Interestingly, there have been experiments on this that I believe this was done in US, where one class, like a university class, they were half of them were made prisoners, and then half of them made security guards on top of them, and within days you would see that the behavior and the psychology completely changed. And the people who were appointed as the security guards, they thought definitely those who are in the prison, they must have done something wrong to deserve to be there. And they considered themselves to be in a better place, that they are to make sure that, oh, these people are bad and we are the good people. So this is, as Muslim also highlighted, this is the psychology that needed to be eradicated, because this had been going on for generations, of keeping slaves and their children being born as slaves. So the Holy Prophet ﷺ made sure that if somebody had a child, if a female prisoner gave birth to a child to the master, she was set free. She was considered to be no longer a slave, rather one of the wives of that person, and she was set free.
I just want to open up the floor here, and I'll start with Tahir Saab, and I want all of you to join into this. And that is the important figure of Hazrat Bilal radiallahu anhu, and the way that figure has transformed Islam, where he has become before Islam, everybody looked down, or in that era, everybody looked down on other races. But Hazrat Bilal radiallahu anhu, when he became Muslim, everybody changed their views, and he was known as a very beloved person to the Holy Prophet ﷺ and to the companions. So, Tahir, if I can start with you, we can go share his story and how he, what happened with him, and anyone else can join in anytime as well. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, since I just wanted to chime in a little bit that we wanted to make these comparisons so we can understand a little bit better. So, like, we know that, from, for example, if someone is interested in history, they read through this, they see it. If you watch in our movies in the Western culture, they have depictions of a lot of slavery during the Roman times and the gladiators and all these things that are going on. And we can come to a fair conclusion that during their time in Greece, Rome, and the Americas as well, slaves were brutally exploited. Their family systems were destroyed. They had no legal protection, and then they had no way out of slavery. So they were stuck in it. We see in a lot of depictions from America when the black or the African Americans were enslaved, they were picking cotton fields and trying to run to Canada. And we see that they had no way out. They had to find an escape to get out of that slave mindset. But in Islam, when Islam was dealing with slaves, this is very important to understand, because this is the solution to a problem, and this is not a overnight solution. It's a process. So when the slaves were brought or in the hands of Muslims, the Holy Quran and the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam made sure that the families also remained intact. That the slaves could also buy their own freedom. And if they wanted to be free, they had that in their mind that today or tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, they can set out a plan and they can have their freedom. And if someone was to abuse their slave, they were punished by the Holy Quran. So this is another fundamental point that we must remember, how Islam gave these enslaved people the rights to their freedom. And once you're freed, you become a full citizen of this place you're living. This is a teaching. And then this is where I wanted to share the tie in with Hazrat Bilal radiallahu anhu, is that we know that Hazrat Bilal radiallahu anhu was a slave. And he accepted Islam in the early days. And when he accepted Islam, he was being beaten by his master because of his acceptance. And then he was rescued and saved by Hazrat Abu Bakr. And then the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam took care of him, not as a slave, but as someone who was coming out to be a good person, or not, I shouldn't say good person, someone who's becoming a productive member of society equal to everyone else. Now, that enabled him to become in communion with God directly. So much so that he had received visions and dreams about how the azan was supposed to be carried out. Such a fundamental principle of the Muslim prayer today, that a slaved person who, under the care of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was also given such a high rank that all of us desire even today, that he was given communion with Allah Ta'ala. He was the first muazzin of Islam, that the Holy Prophet ﷺ had him give the first call to prayer. Now, how much more freedom or how much of a higher status can one give a so-called enslaved person? When you have all the Arabs there and you have an African man calling them all to prayer. So this is the beautiful sign of Islam, which gives hope and the freedom to all the people, that this is what realities of life are. And then the Holy Prophet ﷺ also assigned him and designated him as one of the most senior companions of the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So we can see that a former black slave in the time of Arabia came out and became one of the greatest companions that we all desire to be like even today. So this is the beauty and this is the miracle of the emancipation of slavery by Islam and the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
And before you go on with the comparison you made with America, if you compare that, it's actually a very overnight change. You know, like imagine if the slavery was being abolished as they credit Abraham Lincoln. Imagine if Barack Obama was there at that time, right? Like he was a big figure in this time. Now they're accepting him as a president, right? At that time, somebody expecting them or accepting them as a president, that would never happen. But overnight, Hazrat Bilal became such a big figure in like that. Sorry, go ahead, Muslim.
Yeah, not just like this. Even the Khulafa Rashidin, after the life of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, they continued with the same system of abolishing the concept of slavery. I mean, the Holy Prophet ﷺ himself, he did not really like the word slavery. He once said to his companions that لا تقولوا عبدي وأمتي بل قولوا فتايا وفتاتي, meaning that do not use this term and saying my slave or my male slave or my female slave. Just say fataya or fatati, which means my boy or my girl, not my slave. So during the Khilafah of Hadrat Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, once there was a special gathering in which he had people coming. When people heard about this gathering, everyone wanted to be part of it. And there were people who were actually leaders in their nations, in their tribes, who had converted to Islam afterwards. They were in the forefront line when in front of Hadrat Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he was addressing people. So as they were standing in front, the Holy Hadrat Umar radiallahu anhu was speaking like this. He would see those people who were completely humiliated before Islam, who were slaves, among them Hadrat Bilal radiallahu anhu too, and other people who were enslaved, and then they converted to Islam, and then they suffered so many oppressions, so much oppression during when they accepted Islam. The Hadrat Umar radiallahu anhu would see them from far, and he would say, "You please come to the front. You please come to the front." And he would push those people who were in the front, those leaders who used to be leaders in their tribes, even though they're all Muslims right now, but Islam. So Hadrat Umar radiallahu anhu kept on saying, "Okay, you two come to the front." And then he would see other people, among them Hadrat Bilal and other people who suffered a lot of oppression during the beginning, early days of Islam. He kept on bringing them to the front up until those who were in the forefront, those leaders or highly respected people, they were pushed all the way to the back by the shoes. When they looked at this and they saw like Bilal radiallahu anhu, he was like slave and we were leaders. Why is he giving him so much respect? And we are right now by the shoes. When they saw this, they became very emotional. They started crying. They could not handle this scene. Like Bilal and other companions who were very understood very to be low in the society. And now we were who were highly respected in our tribes. Now we're all the way in the back. They went to Hadrat Umar radiallahu anhu, and they said to him that what happened, and they were crying. They were sincere Muslims too. It's not that they were not good Muslims, but they want the same izzah, they want the same honor that the other Muslims are receiving. We used to be honored before Islam, and what happened now? He said, "You're still honored, but I cannot leave these people who suffered way more than you sit all the way in the back and have you, who did not really suffer much to accept Islam, sit in the front, which is why I have to bring them. They said, how can we become like them? Now imagine, just picture this, imagine this whole scenario in your mind, that those high leaders now are asking Hadrat Umar, how can we become like them? So what can we do to become like them? Hadrat Umar radiallahu anhu told them to go and just do jihad and fi sabilillah and become like them. So this is how Islam continued to actually abolish that concept of slavery.
And before Zahid, by you add anything to this, this is continued to this day too, the effects of it. And I'll compare it to how India and Pakistan is. Their society is built on similarly comparison to what Hindus have done, which I think someone mentioned here as well. The caste system where people are looked very low. Even to this day, people are like that as well. But that one thing that you mentioned, that they were in the front rows. Similarly, in the prayers, the Holy Prophet ﷺ, you would have to stand together. Doesn't matter who that person is. And it's the same concept here. It doesn't matter in Pakistan and India, they have these high emotions as well that, oh, we're superior and others are inferior. But when they accept Islam, same thing. That it doesn't matter if you were high status or low status, you were reading the mosque and you were equal. Everybody's equal in that eyes. So Zahid, please, would you like to add stuff?
Right. I mean, this is the beauty of Islam we're talking about. How a slave has the same respect and honor as a elder or a leader of a tribe or a leader of of the whole society. One example that comes to my mind is during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, a person or some leader came to perform, I believe it was Umrah or Hajj, and he was accompanied by his slave. So during the tawaf, he either struck his slave or did something, or hit him, or stepped on his foot and became angry at his slave and he hit him, or along those lines. So the people told him that you should not have done that. It was not something intentional and you didn't suffer any harm on the hand of that person. So why did you strike him? And that Umar will punish you now. So this person became very scared and he went to Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu, and the news had not reached Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu at that time. So he went to Hazrat Umar and asked him that, is this true? I heard this being said that if a master hits a servant, that you punish them. And he asked him, have you done something to your slave? And that person became very scared and he left overnight. So this was the change that was brought about in Arabia in the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, his companions, his khulafa. A great revolution took place that as the Holy Prophet ﷺ had said in his Hajjatul Wida, that no Arab has superiority over non-Arab. Only taqwa is the basis of righteousness, of superiority. This is the true teaching of Islam. If the countries today or the societies today, whether they are Islamic or otherwise, if they are not, especially the Muslims, if they are not following the teachings of Islam, then it falls on them that they bring disrepute or bad reputation upon the teachings of Islam, and it actually reflects poorly on them as well, most importantly, but it also unfortunately brings a disrepute on Muslims or Islam as well. But reality is that they are not practicing Islam.
Jazakallah. So there's many questions that we can ask, many other points that people might have about this topic, but I'll end this with the last question here, which is I'll go to Muslim and anyone else can join in as well to answer this as well, is on the concept of ma malakat aymanukum, where the female slaves and how that system works and what do we, because I get this question asked a lot as well and nobody really understands exactly what this is, the concept of that is. If Muslim can please explain that in relation to slavery.
Yes, so about what your right hands possess, It's speaking about those war prisoners who are female. So again, as we explained in detail, that Islam always encouraged to not keep those prisoners. We always encouraged the Holy Prophet ﷺ always encouraged the companions to free them in one way or another, and sometimes even without ransom, without anything, for a specific reason. He would encourage the companions to free them. So those women who actually did not want to be freed, even if they had the opportunity, did not want to be freed, and they want to stay there for some reason, they could cause some sort of indecency in the society. At this point, Islam says that you are allowed to marry them. And what's important to remember here, that many people may say that you do not really have to marry them. The difference between the muhsanat and ma malakat aymanukum, which means muhsanat, married woman, your own women who are married, and between the ma malakat aymanukum, Hadrat Muslih Maw'ud radiallahu anhu explained this. He said the difference is that the normal woman who is not war prisoner, she has the choice to say yes or to say no. But those female prisoners, they do not have the choice to say yes or to say no, because Islam knows, Allah is commanding His people that this is for their own betterment and for the Muslims and for the society. You are trying to save them. They are given all the options. You don't have anyone to free you, to give ransom for you. You just do this and then free yourself. You don't want to go, then if you have something, you give it and then you go. فَإِمَّا مَنًّا بَعْدُ وَإِمَّا فِدَاءً. They would reject all the ways and means to be freed. It means they have something to do in that society. So to protect the society from any sort of indecency, the Islam encourages those who own them, or who, I don't want to say own them, those who have them, to free them. Free them by marrying them. The moment they get married and they have their first child, they become free. Afterwards, if they want to even leave, divorce and leave, they can become free and they have to leave. But the main important thing is that you have to teach them to become part of a productive member of the society, not just spread the indecency in the society. So Islam, there are multiple ahadith I have in front of me. I just don't want to take long. One hadith in which the Holy Prophet ﷺ says that if a man أيما رجل كانت عنده وليدة فعلمها فأحسن تعليمها وأدبها فأحسن تأديبها ثم أعتقها وزوجها فله أجران. He was encouraging the Muslims that if any of you has a female prisoner or female as a prisoner, you may, if you teach her and slowly you get married to her and then you free her, Allah will reward you here in this life and in the hereafter. So continuously he continued to encourage the companions to free everyone. Again, the main purpose is to abolish slavery and all types of enslavement.
Jazakumullah. So
I think one aspect, sorry, Musuja, I'm cutting
yes,
you
yes.
off. I think one important aspect to remember about the female prisoners of war is that, the one, if they were giving to a person, this was not to fulfill their any sexual desires, because the behavior of the Sahaba, the way the Sahaba acted, we know from their character that these were righteous people. They even came to the Holy Prophet ﷺ before all of these episodes that, if you allow us, we want to remain,
Celibate.
celibate. We don't want to marry. So this was not something for fulfilling their lust or sexual desire. This was a system which was needed at the time where other systems did not exist. So how to make the best of a situation where the rights of the individual and the moral environment and the sanctity of the society in general can be preserved. And I think this is the thing, because if you look at the consequences of wars, most notably, let's say the World War II, where the invading forces, wherever they conquered, you will find that the cases of rape are a accepted result of the war. It is a accepted something consequence that would take place. So they give the examples of when the Japan won the territories around that area, what happened to the women in those territories. When the Russians conquered the German land, what happened to the German women, and so on and so forth. So this was what is happening in the civilized society after 1300 years, and we're talking about 1300 years before that, where the prisons and all those things did not exist. So we must keep the context in mind, and then we should look at how were they treated, practical examples, and not just emotional arguments where, oh, they didn't have a choice, or they were forced into marriages, and so on and so forth. I think these are the also important aspects that one should remember when studying this question.
So here, I think you mentioned it very well as well, that the question when we're asking in this era, like you have to look at the context, you have to look at that society, you have to look at how it was being dealt there. It wasn't that Islam had this part of its religion. It was something that was continued on, and it happened throughout the world. All of this slavery, rights of women, and everything. But Islam came and it wanted to abolish it and change the views. As you mentioned in World War, it's saying that Islam is not saying. Islam is saying that when that happens, now we have a situation where we can control that, where there aren't any rape or anything like that happening there. So that is what Islam had done. Where Muslim has mentioned this as well, that it's the society that was there. They had all the rights and everything, but the worst case scenario, worst case situation, what would you do then? That's what it was, and that's how they had to change it and get out of it. And now you can see even that has been abolished as well. That no longer is needed in this time and era. Tariba, you have anything to add as well?
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
this is why it should be remembered that these prisoner of wars are only allowed in times of war. This is not a civil code, you can say. So there's a military code during the times of war, and then there's a civil code. So we should remember that this practice is not allowed until war takes place. So it is only allowed, the female prisoners would only be allowed in the times of war, and not just at any given time.
Sorry, Tariba?
Jazakallah Sinza. I know we're coming to the end of the session today, but we've spoken 90% of what's happened in the historical past. And like even today, when we see that the teachings Islam gave us 1400 years ago are still prevalent and relevant today. So, we hear the word slavery, we think that, we don't have any more slaves, but in different forms and different shapes in our society still today, we have these things going on. Like forced labor is something that is pretty prevalent around the world. Trafficking, child soldiers, debt bondage. We see this on the media all the time. People are forced to do things because they owe someone a lot of money. And then exploiting migrant workers. So when you look in our society even today, Islam has given us solutions and enforced a lot of boundaries of what we can do and what we can't do. So the teachings of Islam are even relevant today. Like, for example, we didn't mention this throughout the session, is that Islam has set charity up, zakat, which is a fundamental principle for all Muslims to execute throughout their life. Now, under zakat, there's a fund for freeing slaves that was set up by the Muslims. Now, this is a fund that can be utilized to help people who are in bondage, help people who are in forced labor, those who are forced because of desperation. They have to do things because they're being enslaved by a master, quote unquote. This is still happening today, and Islam is providing a means to give them their freedom. Even Islam punishes those who are involved in trafficking. The Holy Prophet ﷺ has said that even when you're paying someone, when you have workers working for you, you have to make sure you give them their right. Pay the worker before his sweat dries. This is the teaching of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. All these things, all these ethics, all these guidelines, because slavery was so prevalent clearly in our face in those days, all these rules and guidelines were given to us by Islam. And today we have it in a different form. But those principles are still there. And if we follow those principles, we can have a more peaceful and loving society, a more, heavenly society, a society where all blacks, whites, like the Holy Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has said in his final sermon, that everyone is equal in the sight of God. And this is what we should live by, and we should make sure we can support and live together in a more harmonious society.
You're on mute, Mr.
Sorry about that. Jazakallah Tahir Bhai for with those notes. As you know, that we are coming to the end of the program, and I hope we have established that the question of did Islam truly end slavery, that with those that the evidences we have provided, we can easily say yes, that Islam is the one and the only one that had abolished slavery and even other rights as well. And we can tell this by, even if you look at the Western society, Islam, as Tahir Bhai had mentioned as well, 1400 years ago had done this. But the Western society just started doing this like 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Before that, as people claim that, oh, Muslims are barbaric or they're living in a barbarianism society, it was actually the Western society that was in that state where there were no women rights, that slavery was prevalent, that they had no purpose or rights or anything like that. But Islamic societies, even at that time, were not barbaric. So they could have said that to the Western society. So this is what Islam has done, and the facts are still to this day where we can find that it is the true way that you can end these evil things within the society, such as slavery and other rights. Yes.
Just to add one point, even though respected Murabbi Sahab, Zahid Sahab already mentioned some of it, but it's very important to actually compare. Those who attack Islam and say Islam is being is oppressing women, especially when it comes to what your right hands possess. We have to compare with what was happening before Islam. So when wars would happen and female prisoners are captured, what did the non-Muslims, or before Islam, those winning or prevailing military do with those women? Even if they wanted them to get married, they would marry only slaves, and they would remain slaves for the rest of their lives. Even their children, their grandchildren, and then their whole progeny is gone. Again, as we mentioned before, Islam was aiming to end that slavery, to stop it right there, which is why if they got married, even if they don't want this marriage, they can divorce and leave, but they are completely free afterwards. They are not slaves. They're not really understood as a low member of the society anymore.
Jazakallah Mr. Bhai. So Islam did not invent slavery. It inherited it. Its mission was to regulate it, humanize it, and eliminate it. And this, even now, in this society, even in the Western society, it has still not come to that what Islam had already done in the 1400 years ago. So we can see clearly that Islam has ended slavery, and there's no part of slavery in the teachings of Islam. With this, I would like to end this live stream, and inshallah, we will be back again next Thursday at the same time with another topic. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.